It's staggering. Almost 3,000 people died in the 9/11 attacks. It took the Iraq War almost 3 years to reach that death toll. One day, a couple hours, 3,000 people. Aside from deaths, we can look at injuries. My opponent brought up the Boston bombings. Only 3 people died there. Almost 150 were injured. Almost 70 lost limbs. What are you going to tell those 70 people when they wake up without an arm or a leg? It wasn't a big terrorist attack. Walk it off. Well, crutch it off. The scale of these attacks is not necessarily a problem, you see, because terrorism is more than just deaths. It does more to us. She brought up how 9/11 affected the way we travel by plane. You can't get on a plane without being patted down, essentially strip searched. How long is that going to go on? It's been over a decade. Will it be 2 decades? 3? 4? Will you never be able to get on a plane after doing that? After that happened? How do you think the Boston bombings are going to affect how Boston does its marathons? Will people no longer be able to be at the finish line now? Won't be able to cheer on the people they're supporting? Will they need to be patted down to come out and see the race? We don't know. Besides that, my opponent tried to minimize terrorism. Terrorism happens all over the world, and there's more than just Al-Qaeda. The FBI has identified over 30 different foreign terrorist attacks. And this doesn't look at the various rise in domestic terrorist attacks. Just some of the terrorist groups. We have the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the Revolutionary Organization, Revolutionary People's Liberty Party Front, the Shining Path, Al-Qaeda, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the Real Irish Republic Army, United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, I'm not going to pronounce that one, Communist Party of the Philippines, the Continuity Irish Republican Army, and the list goes on and on. And it is true that while the United States does not see as many terrorist attacks on the soil, U.S. citizens are attacked all over the world. For an example, we've seen attacks in Lebanon where a U.S. embassy was destroyed. There was Saudi Arabia, a truck bomb exploded, killing almost 19 American servicemen. And as with the groups, the list goes on and on. Terrorism is a practical threat, not a hypothetical one like China. Hopefully by the end of the day, you will see my point. Thank you.
2.5 minutes.
My opponent has brought up some very good points, like one, that terrorism kills people. However, economies, in a way, affect a lot more of people than, terrorism, because terrorism goes after select groups. They go after political people, organizations, large business, to bring, to bring notice to their cause or to whatever they believe in. Economies, which our economy will collapse if we don't fix it and fix our debt, it will affect everyone. We'll hit another depression. It's projected that it will be as worse, it'll be as bad as the 1930s depression, which we weren't alive for, but we've all read in history books that it was not good. And the thing is, we won't have another war to bring us out of this depression, because we fight our wars differently. It just won't happen. My opponent has also brought up the fact of that China is just a trend. Our economy is not a trend. Our economy is very permanent, and even though it's China that owns it, it could be anyone. Japan is another rising influence upon our economy. If China overtakes our economy, we won't be the top dog anymore in the world. Now we'll have to go with China, which won't benefit us at all. And the third is that terrorism is fast-paced. Sure, it does occur in an instant, and it occurs all over the world. However, we are talking specifically about the United States. It does not occur every single day in the United States. Our economy occurs every single day. And by the time that we're reaching to 2016, where the Chinese will surpass us, that is a looming threat that is coming upon us that we need to fix. We need to fix our debt now for it to be able to not be affected by the Chinese becoming the biggest economy. And that's it.
fascinating, America's need to be the top dog all the time. Britain was the top dog for quite a while, and then, World War II, and they kind of crashed. Britain didn't lose its top dogness. No, they're not number one. They're number two, though. Still a fairly decent number. China will not become the world power simply because of this. In part because they don't actually have the power to completely crumble our economy. Yes, it is true we have to get our debt under control, but this is off topic. We're not looking at our whole debt. We're looking at China's portion of our debt, which is only about 7.5% of it. In fact, most of our debt is actually owned by companies in-house. Things like Goldman Sachs, Bank of America. No, there is a problem with our debt. But focusing solely on China. China isn't going to begin calling in their money. They haven't done it yet, and they won't. Because, as she says, they use it to keep their money lower than ours. That way they can export goods cheaply. Besides that, they've shown that they won't do it. In 2008, for example, when we were in our recession, they could have decided to cut their losses. But they didn't. Because they know that having our debt gives them leverage. Things that they can use either against us or to maneuver with other countries and, of course, keep their export prices low. China realizes that they do need our debt. China is no longer an isolationist country. They realize that the world economy is more important than simply them proving a point to the States. I'm going to stop there for now. Thank you.
For closing statements, 3 minutes.
I just want to touch upon the last point that my opponent was making about that China won't call in our debts. They won't do that because they'll crash every single economy in the world, because right now we're the top economy. So there would be no point in them doing so. But once they are the top economy, they don't really need our debt now, do they? Because they're the top economy. Why would they need our debt? So they will start cutting off buying of our bonds, and they will start calling in the need for our money, which won't help us at all. And so China, or any country who owns our debt, is a threat to our nation. We just decided China because they are the largest foreign owner. Japan, as I said before, is the second, and they're about to surpass China if it continues on this way, because the less that China owns of our debt, the more that Japan is going to buy up, because they are a growing economy as well. They're following in the steps of China. Unlike terrorism, which is continuous. It will always be continuous. You can't really get rid of terrorism because that's just, it would be so difficult to do that it's just not worth it. It's hard to plan an attack that someone someday just decides, oh, I think I'm going to go blow up this building with all these homemade goods. It's hard to plan, and unlike our debt and China, we can't stop terrorism. But we can make steps to stop terrorism and to stop the number of attacks, which we have done. We have made no steps to stop our debt and stop the amount that China is buying. They are stopping their own, which is not a good plan for ours. We need to rein in our own debt. We need to come up with a budget right now, and we need to stop letting out as many bonds to foreign nations as we have been doing in the past.
3 minutes.
Terrorism is too difficult to stop. So we should just lie down and accept terrorism, like a puppy being kicked in an alleyway. We shouldn't do anything about it. Now, I'm all for getting our debt into check. We do need to pay it back. But to simply wave terrorism off, the deaths of people? Yes, terrorist attacks have gotten smaller, and we haven't seen anything like it since 9/11. But what value do you put to human lives, American lives? We can't stop it, so we should just do nothing about it. I think that sentiment was shared with slavery. We can't do anything about it. It's too big. Let it go. World War II, slaughtering of the Jews. We can't do anything about it. Germany's problem. Let it go. Terrorism is a big problem. She just said it. It's big, and she doesn't think it can be stopped. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try when there are lives on the line. Innocent lives on the line. Thank you very much.
Both of you up there. The floor is open for questions.
Yes.
So would you say that the Chinese holding over our treasury bonds doesn't put our lives at stake then?
No. Do you think it does?
I think it does.
It definitely does. It lowers all of our quality of life, which doesn't necessarily kill people, but like homes foreclosing, everyone losing their job. How are you going to survive off of that? You're going to see a mass of homeless people, and homeless people don't really have that great of quality of life.
How has their owning our debt affected or had made that happen thus far?
Because right now, we are not in a state. However, we are talking about projections, like as I said, in about 2016 they will surpass us, which we will go into another depression if they surpass our economy.
So again, a hypothetical threat.
Like how you said with the United Kingdom, how they went into a depression once we surpassed them. The same thing will happen, except for they weren't in near as debt as we are right now.
They didn't go into a debt because we surpassed them. They went into a debt because Germany bombed them throughout World War II. But just them surpassing us doesn't prove anything. So they become the second country, so the United States just stops.
They stop because they will start calling in our debt. They won't need our debt. They won't buy up our debt. So if we continue spending as we're spending right now, who's going to buy up our debt?
Other nations, and again, most of our debt is owned by banks within the United States.
Most, but
majority. China owns 7.4%.
But that's still 7.4%. That's still a couple of $1 trillion worth of debt that we won't be able to spend. And our country likes to spend quite a lot.
Okay, so we stop our spending. So let's say they become the biggest economy. Explain what the biggest economy is.
The biggest economy is the one that has the least debt, the one that is most influential.
No, it is the one that buys and sells. That is what the biggest economy is. Just because that happens to be China, it should be China. They have like the second world's largest population behind India. They should have the largest economy because they have the most people who would thus buy and sell things. Yes.
Okay, so back to terrorism. How is terrorism not a hypothetical? Like, I get that there's been terrorist attacks, but you're projecting that they're still going to happen.
Yes.
So, how does that make it different from the Chinese?
Because it happens almost every day. No, not in the States, but to American citizens over in Iraq and Afghanistan. People who visit Russia. It happens almost every day.
But where are you getting the statistic that it happens almost every day? It does happen almost every day, but not to our nation. It happens in the Middle East and in South Asia.
To our people. Are they not? It doesn't
Why
matter.
are people going to the Middle East and South Asia? No one goes there except for like our military.
Oh, do they not count? Our military?
Our military does count, but they are sent over there for a reason. That is not really a terrorist attack.
You can hardly claim that a soldier, under any conditions, is a victim of terrorism. Terrorism is, by definition, directed at a civilian population.
Yes. The definition of terrorism is attack against people to prove a political point, which is
Except for they are unarmed.
But you don't get political points for killing soldiers. You get political points for disrupting. I have a question.
Yes.
Do we have any examples of nations calling in debt to direct other countries' foreign policy or tell them what to do or anything like that?
I have found none. No.
I have found none either.
Ah. 1948. Who was the nation who had their debt called in?
We really don't know.
That would be Great Britain. Who was the nation who called their debt? That would be the United States.
Wouldn't it also be the same with Germany and all the debts like in World War I right after, how they were all...
Yeah, the debt was crushing there, but what was different in the case of Britain was that we held the debt and called up the Prime Minister. The President got the Prime Minister on the phone and said, we will dump all of our British sterling on the market in the next 48 hours if you don't do the following. And they did. We held 6% of British debt at that point.
Okay. So say that does happen. China calls in and they make various terms, and we follow those terms. Was Britain's economy crushed by that?
No, because they did what we told them to do.
So then we shouldn't do what China asked us to do?
You said yourself that Britain went into a depression after World War II. This is
Because
right
they
after
were
World War II.
bombed. Because
Yeah, no,
everything was
the
destroyed.
depression they had in World War II is they just had a non-functioning economy. But what happened with 48 was we called them and said, here's what your foreign policy is going to be. Could China call the president and determine our foreign policy with regard to, say, Taiwan?
Probably, yes.
Very easily.
Okay, now wait a minute. That's not a threat to our national security? If the premier of China can call the president and dictate our foreign policy, how is that not a larger threat than Al-Qaeda,
We can always just say
who
no.
presently is like 350 bearded guys living in a cave somewhere?
Well, but there's more than just Al-Qaeda where I brought up. So that is true. It's very sad we're still 10 years in the Middle East. But we could simply say no.
If we say no, then they'll dump all of our, which will be very detrimental to everyone ever.
Everyone ever.
Everyone
There's
ever.
a reason Britain said yes when we said, by the way, you need to get all of your troops out of northern Egypt right now. They did it because it would have been devastating to their entire economy if they didn't do what we said.
That's kind of the reason why people say that China own us, which isn't necessarily true because they own our debt, but very easily they can own our influences and our actions just by saying they're going to drop.
But that would be detrimental to China, who
It-
would then, not only would they no longer have our debt to keep their yuan low, it would devastate not just our economy, but the world's economy. It would send the world into a state like the 30s.
It would, yes. However, they could still drop a large portion, which won't affect the world nearly as badly. as
It
dropping
would though.
everything.
The world runs on the US dollar. If all of a sudden there are a whole bunch of US dollars just circulating throughout the world, the value of it plummets.
Okay, I'm going to switch this a little bit. What if China was the world economy? And you know how you were talking about how this isn't going to affect us at all? If China is the world like the top economy? Then they could very easily drop us and this won't affect the world because,
So the world's going to switch to the yuan.
yeah, because they're going to be, yeah, well not overnight, obviously not, but if they switch and China's the top economy, they can drop and call in all of our stuff, which is what happened with the United States and the Britain. This is what his point is. Once China becomes top economy, they can call in, and we can't do anything
Not
about
top
it.
economy. The United States became the top dog in the sense of military power and various other ways. Not just we had the world's largest economy.
And China won't be able to have a top military? Why?
Why would they?
They have more people than us.
Okay, people that's going for it. It's a couple well-placed machine guns would get that number down real quick.
China has more space than we do. They could very easily
If
become a
you-
top military power.
Okay, incidentally, if you line the Chinese army up 8 abreast and march them toward us, we can mow them down with machine guns, and we never get to the end of the Chinese army. They're being born and being replaced faster than we can kill them. Okay? I'm not kidding. Yeah.
Not true. They have a shortage of women, so they actually might not.
But they
Which,
probably wouldn't let women.
I've grilled her enough. Let me grill you then. Okay, so, she has an excellent point. The population issue in China is pretty intense right now. They don't have a lot of women. And the idea that China is going to somehow become a viable world economy, China's got at least 2 civil wars in it before it ever stabilized. I mean, there are 3 different Chinas over there. It's like Yugoslavia at the end of the Cold War. I mean, you know, as soon as the central government loosens control, you're at least going to have 3 different Chinas emerge from there. So really, I mean, to get a really good operating economy, they're going to have to loosen controls. To loosen controls is to lose at least the northern 2/3 of the country.
But why are are they going to need to loosen controls when the controls is what is helping them?
Because you can't build a world economy based on controls. World economies have to be based on the idea of free economy, free competition. So they're going to have to loosen their currency, and they're going to have to loosen governmental controls and structures. Once that happens, they're going to have a civil war. Don't worry about China. Maybe you got to worry about are down in South and Central America. Those are the economies you got to worry about. Maybe India. But China? No, China's not going to threaten us, is it? Why would we be afraid of China?
We'd be afraid of China because, like as I was saying, usually you would have to loosen up the power. You'd have to loosen up the power once they become a large economy, and they're already a large economy. So wouldn't they still be a threat? Because even though they might lose control, they might have a civil war, they could still call in and be like, we still want your money to help fund their civil war going on, like the main government. That could be a really good reason why they would call in and be like, we need money, we need to be paid.
Yeah, and the United States says, look, we don't recognize this as the legitimate government of China anymore, so if you buy any of our debt from them, we don't recognize it. Let's just wait and see who wins the war in China. That'll be the legitimate government, and then they'll hold America's debt. So we put it on hold, and then everybody in China kills each other, and they all forget how much they owe us. We're off the hook.
Besides
In fact, I think this is the plan.
there you go. Okay, besides that, China's a communist country with millionaires and billionaires. That wealth is not equally distributed. That enough in itself can cause a civil war with them becoming a large economy. Yes.
So would you say our wealth is equally distributed?
So then why haven't we had a civil war?
Because ours is more equally distributed than China's is.
But we're still not equally distributed.
We're also not a communist country.
But they're becoming less of a communist country.
But the communist is everybody is equal. How can you have millionaires and billionaires when we're a communist, everybody should be
Because
equal?
they're not a pure communistic country. They're becoming more of a democratic.
And that won't
More.
upset,
Anyways, not completely, just more.
and that won't upset people who signed up to be in a communist country?
No, because they didn't sign up to be a communist country, they were born in it.
So, would you say that a communist country has more control over us than terrorists?
I would say so, yes. Because terrorists attack select groups. And as I was saying before, they mainly go after politicians, political groups, large businesses. The Boston bombing was only a fluke because originally they were going to go after the 4th of July. They just became impatient, and so they went after the marathon. That one was just a little bit of a fluke.
The 4th of July is a date.
But then Boston has a huge celebration during the 4th of July. It's huge.
And that's a politician? That's not
It's
people
an
coming out?
organization.
The 4th of July is an organization?
It's a political organization going on. Everyone celebrates 4th of July because it's Independence Day. It's still a political.
I missed the nation. I'm sorry. I missed when the 4th of July was not just a day
How
of
is it not
celebration.
political?
It's a day of celebration.
That we became an independent country. That is very political.
Okay, alright.
4 minutes, I'm enjoying this. All right, fine, go. Outline